Hey everybody, it's Professor Snart here. I thought I'd just check in a slightly less common way here where it's the talking head version of me rather than me walking us through our course. We're kind of, mid-unit here, so I'm less concerned with navigating pieces of what we're looking at in the course and a little more concerned or want to introduce myself to you as an actual human being with an office and messes over there and all that kind of stuff. And just make a couple of comments that are really sort of generic for the course, although as we get into it now, they sort of apply more than they would early on. So once we're doing some actual writing in the course, you're getting grade, feedback, comments, etc., etc. So I want to make some notes about the grading, the commenting, feedback piece of it, and then also some preliminary things about our workshop that's coming up. And I'll try not to forget anything, but also move this along a little bit. So you can, and I'm going to do this myself actually, you can navigate to various places in our course. There's a note on feedback and kind of my philosophy of how it's going to work for us. There's also notes on grading. So again, you can review this stuff. But I wanted to say it in a slightly more natural way here. So on the grading side of it, to protect myself and to protect you and to sort of embrace what this course is really about, I've set up the grading so that it's largely, especially for the workshops where the point value is a little bit higher and you're producing a more, I would say, complete or authentic piece of work, whether it's a short story, a poem, whatever it's going to be. Especially in that situation, I wanted to set it up so that it was not, you're not getting a grade based on how good your story is, for example. It's not that there aren't the rules that we've talked about or guidelines to think about or good writing practices to implement, but I don't want your writing, the individual writing that you do for the class, to become sort of the locus for where I assess, did you apply the rule and did you not, or et cetera, et cetera. It puts me in a really awkward spot, and it's also just like not very heartening, I think, to have it doesn't empower you to take a risk as a writer. So people tend to fall back into what they're comfortable with, they're used to, or what they think writing should sound like. And they don't learn very much about writing, you don't improve, it's not interesting to read, so it's sort of a lose-lose proposition. So you can look at the way the grade breaks down especially for the workshop. I mean, it's out of 100 points, and I hope it doesn't seem too simplistic, but a lot of those are just like, did you post on time in a format? So you've posted a link that is now accessible to us so that we can actually access your document and build comments into it. So it's pretty low-hanging fruit. Like, that's pretty easy to do. You're just following directions. It's not high-level theoretical stuff. On time, accessible document that we can get to and do comments in. A big part of workshop is the quality or the sort of effort that I sense in your feedback to other students, and this sort of leads to like how the feedback works in our class. So it's really not about the so-called quality of the writing that you're doing. I find that again just puts me at a really awkward position trying to grade these things, but it also really hampers you on the writing side as you're trying to do new things and put into practice these like ideas or rules that maybe you haven't run into before. So you need that space to like take that risk, to do something that maybe kind of backfires the first time. Like writing, like most things in life, honestly, learning to do it is not just this sort of endless progression, getting better and better and better. The only way we get better is trying out new writing techniques. And of course, sometimes they don't work, or they don't work the way that we want them to. So hopefully it feels like good news that the bulk of your grade, especially for the workshops, is really about, just getting the thing done on time and it's accessible for us, so a practical level thing. But then a larger part of it is really your effort, obviously I need to see effort in the writing that you produce. If it's just clearly the night before kind of stuff, then that's obviously going to have an effect. But I'm equally interested in the effort that you put into providing commentary on other people's work, which again is why, this discussion is focused on the workshops, because that's primarily where we exchange work and get extended feedback from people. And that's explained in the course, like how practically that works. I just want to give you a sense of how the grading part of it works, right? So very little is on the is this a great short story? Is it a B short story? Is it a D or whatever? Like, who could even tell? Certainly, I expect people to be trying to apply the rules, right? So again, if it's clearly just flung together at the last minute and pretty much breaks every rule that we've been looking at, doesn't reflect any kind of engagement with the course, that'll be an issue. But by and large, it's like practical stuff of getting things done on time, in the right format, so we can do the workshop the way that we want it to do, and your investment in providing feedback. So the way the course is set up, and just practically again speaking, we have 20 plus students. We're doing lots of writing, often more than just one thing on a week-to-week basis. And I clearly want to get a grade back to you in a timely manner. So it's not practical on my end to try to line edit every single thing that every single person writes. It would be the end of the semester, and I'd only be like halfway through the grading. So there's just the practical side of it. But there's also like a sort of philosophy of providing feedback where it actually hampers things if I'm providing line level edits about every possible correction that could be made, or little typo or wording error or whatever, right? You just sort of get mired in that commentary. So it takes me forever to do. It's not particularly helpful on the writer's end of it. And at some point, we know actually from research that a lot of students, they don't even wade through all that stuff. So it's just wasted effort on my part. And even if you do look at all that stuff, it doesn't always have this really great positive effect. So especially for our writing exercises, you're not going to get tons of commentary when you get that grade back. Having said that, though, if you're interested in meeting with me, either face-to-face or we can connect virtually, and actually sitting down and looking at a piece of writing and really diving deep into it, by all means send me an email and we can do that. But I'm not going to do that for every student, for every single, especially one-off writing assignment that we do. For the workshops, then, I also tend not to line edit or give just massive commentary, precisely because they're set up as workshops where what you really want, what's most valuable, I think, for you as a writer, is getting feedback from your peers, from the people who would be reading your work if it showed up in a literary journal or the newspaper, whatever, right? And so if I suddenly jump in there and start pointing this thing out as really great or this thing out isn't working, et cetera, it sort of drowns out, it muddies that conversation that I think otherwise can be so productive, which, to go back to what I was saying, is why a significant portion of the workshop grade isn't really about your work, the short story, the poem, et cetera. It's about the investment of time you put in to the commenting on other people's work, because that's really what I think is most valuable about this course. Not getting a one-off comment from me a couple of times throughout, but getting sustained comments from people, 2 or 3 readers for each and every piece of writing that you're doing, at least especially with the workshops. So again, the nice thing about the workshop is if you're unsure about something, or you're not sure if a character works, a title, the ending, whatever the case might be, you're getting feedback not just from one reader, but from multiple readers. So if one person says, yeah, the ending was kind of confusing, but if the other 2 said, oh, I really love it, then you as the writer can kind of process that and figure out, well, do I need to return to the ending? Maybe it's less clear than I want, but it's actually working better than I thought it might be. But if everybody says, oh, the ending was great, or oh, I loved the story, but I didn't get the ending at all, then you have more of that opinion to work with. It's not just one person in one situation. It's that whole chorus of voices pointing you towards things that are working, but also maybe things that aren't working quite so well. Okay, so one last note as we get towards our first workshop. Still a couple weeks away, but you want to be thinking about that short story now and actually starting to draft it. So again, it doesn't become a rush job the night before kind of a deal. Is if you think of a continuum where on one side is the very first idea you might have for a short story. Maybe it's like something you see in daily life, a newspaper thing you hear or that you read, a thing on the radio in the news. Just a little kernel of that idea, something you jot down, right? That's on one continuum, or one end. On the very other end is what, for lack of a better term, we would call the finished work, although, like, part of the problem is that things are never finished. You can always go back, but we'll just call it its most recent draft. So that's from the very beginning to the very, let's say, end of the life of that work. It's ready to go out for publication. Where do we want the work that we are doing for this class, for the workshops, to fall on that continuum? Well, we don't want things that you just thought of the day before and kind of like dashed out a story because you haven't invested enough time, and it's sort of unfair then to expect readers to invest a whole bunch of time and wade through something that you haven't really worked over a little bit. But on the other hand, and this again goes back to like why me trying to grade you on the quality of the story doesn't work. If the purpose of that writing is for workshop, right, to get feedback from writers about what's working but what's not working, it doesn't make any sense to submit something that you wrote years ago, you've been spending all this time revising, and you're really like, let's be honest, not totally open to changing anything, right? So the purpose of workshop isn't to get validation for work that you think is already complete and just perfect. The point is to get feedback to make it better. So back to that continuum, we don't want the initial idea or some like the first draft after it. We don't want the totally complete perfect thing that you're not really open to making changes. We want to find that sweet spot kind of in the middle. You've got this idea, you've worked through a couple of revisions, not just editing, but actually changing things and thinking things through. But you're not bound to feeling like this is a finished piece, this is exactly how I want it, and I'm not going to change anything. So ironically, right, and this is again back to the grading part, I'm inviting you to submit work for a grade, but that isn't in a polished state. It would be like submitting, the second draft of an essay, but then I grade that as if it was the final one. We would never do that in a standard composition class, so it doesn't make sense to do it here. So think about that as you work towards, especially our first workshop, our short story workshop coming up in a couple of weeks. We don't want that initial idea or just the first draft that you got out on paper, but we also don't expect this perfectly polished, finished thing that you've been working on for years and years at a time. And again, keep in mind how the grading works, and also the commentary that you get back from me is intentionally limited, but with the caveat that I'm always open to sitting down with people for a longer, more in-depth conversation. Again, we can do it face-to-face. We can do it online and screen share, so we can have a piece of writing open in front of us and talk through it. So it's not like I'm averse to providing that commentary, but it's not going to be built into every single assignment that we're doing for the class. Okay, so that's enough for me at this point. That was the short and fast version of this, so thank you, lucky stars. The writing that everyone's been doing so far has been really great. I love how the portfolios are starting to get built out already. And I look forward to the continuing work that we'll be doing as we work through our units coming up here.